Hello again. Here we are. I'm Jen.
Three of us this time. I'm Kyle Godby, and this is Field Notes from the Swamp. And today we have Stephen Weissenburger joining us. I'm not going to do an intro. This is our first attempt at all of this, so we're going to keep it as informal as we've been doing it. And I'm going to hand it to you, Stephen, to introduce yourself and say hello.
Yeah, so I'm Stephen Weissenburger. For over 15 years, I've actually worked in an academic medical center, doing a lot of the complexity-based or design-based or, as earlier in my career, system thinking-based approaches and using it in mid-level issues in our organization. And actually really early in that tenure, we actually had external clients external to our medical center. So we were dealing with some of the larger issues with some of those clients. I don't know if I remember them all. It's a long time ago, but yeah. So I carry a bunch of experience with what does it look like when you integrate this within an organization, what the challenges are and what the benefits are with that.
I cannot wait to dig into this because Kyle and I both know you, and we know from lots of conversations, bits and pieces, more or less, about all that work you've done. But I absolutely feel like one of the most burning things that anybody who might actually watch this would want to hear about is like how did you actually get in there and get doing it? Because like the most common question we field in any kind of social setting about complexity informed practices is, I get it. I'm dying to start doing this. I can't convince my boss to let me do it, or I can't find a job where, I can do this. And so how did you actually get to the point where you might have looked at yourself as saying, I'm doing this now in this practice?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I wish I had a magic answer for you, but it happened that when I showed up on the scene, it was already going on. So in 2002, what was known as the Vanderbilt Center for Better Health was launched. And that was an initiative by the then head of the medical center and one of his deputies who became our chief strategy officer, Dr. Bill Stead, who was really about how do we, find solutions to the most intractable problems in healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And they sought out a process and a way of doing it. My background actually previously came in from a set of work done by Matt Taylor and Gail Taylor, collectively known as MG Taylor. That organization has since dissolved, but that work continues on and those methods continue on. And they also had physical space for it. So as many of my friends in the practitioner community know, Vanderbilt University Medical Center, where I have worked previously, they have a 9,000 square foot facility to actually do the work in. So it really was, there was a need that the organization saw and they wanted to fill the need, and they knew that it wasn't going to be filled with traditional processes that they already had in place. So, and when I came around in 2007, there was already an active client base, an active use of it in those processes. So if anything else, I mean, at minimum, it's clear that you need a champion who kind of gets it, and a champion at an executive enough level that says, I will create the space to actually do these practices in.
Yeah. Yeah. So now everybody listening is despairing because they're like, well, I don't have a place like this. No, I'm just kidding. But it does raise a point that I think is really key. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, which is that champion. In your case, even if there was already fertile soil and some energy and some interest in, we need to do things a little differently, you probably, I imagine, still had to develop a relationship and trust with whoever those sponsors might have been in your org in order to keep being able to do and introduce new things. Right? Like I can imagine how that's gone in my client organizations, but when I'm doing it as an outside partner, I'm occupying a very different space than being internal, like you two generally have been over a lot of your career. So I just find that to be a really interesting thing to think about. I'm curious to hear it from either of you, honestly, but like just how you, even if you're not the one generating that initial interest, how you like build and maintain the trust and the credibility to let you keep doing stuff.
Yeah, so one of the stories that resonates with me is that when I took over as director in 2021, I think it was 2021, of what became the Strategy and Innovation Office. So this we basically said, if you can't do market analytics or financial analytics or operational analytics to figure out where are you going to go next, that's when coming to us would be helpful, because we're kind of like, how do you go on the journey into the unknown, especially if it's foggy? How do you go into a forest that's unmapped versus, going on Google Maps and saying, let me put in my parameters and I can get some options here, or get the option of the route to go. So one of the things that was happening at that point is that for those of us who are familiar with the field that we're operating in, there's really been this shift. There was, hey, it's all about systems thinking and design thinking and whatnot. And those of us who are in the weeds of practices, it was really like, you know what? There are some more scientifically grounded ways to do this. One of those that actually is how the three of us got met was through Dave Snowden and the Kinevin Company and the work they're doing in anthrocomplexity, which is the one that we took on. So one of the things, not just saying, hey, it looks like we need to go to this new practice, was really about introducing to my executive leadership, which had changed over by that point, to really say, this is where we've been. This is where we're heading. This is why we're heading. I know for me, one of the things that was helpful, at least at the time, was talking a little bit about the science actually helped in my environment. We're an academic medical center. So speaking to scientists about scientific knowledge, even if I can't give you every single fact, that is actually helpful. It's not necessarily helpful in others. I've been going around as I am in a career transition, talking with people. And one of the things that's clear is, in this highly volatile environment, people are really like, I just need results. I don't care how I get to them. I just need results. Yeah. So that's really shifted from sort of selling process to selling outcomes, with that, which I'm not always the best at sometimes. So, I know my process a lot, and I justify it by having, we got a really good process, with that. But that was part of what was going on. And the good thing is we were riding on our previous reputation, but I was then able to integrate newer methodologies as we went through that. I think one of the biggest hurdles we had is we're in an environment where there's still a lot of people who say, I need a mission statement, I need a vision statement, I need my values, and then, and then go from there. And a lot of us know it's really not as straightforward as that. You really need a sense of direction. You need a sense of what's going on in the landscape. And then from there, figuring out, how do I shift those dynamics to meet those needs? Yeah, you need to know why you exist, but it ain't that hard, kind of thing. I can't tell you how many clients came to me.
Blasphemy.
Like, I had a lot of internal departments that said, hey, we need a mission statement. I'm like, how is it past what you functionally do? If you want a mission statement, it's the one for the organization we're a part of. So anyway, but I won't go down that road.
No, that's kind of fascinating. I'm glad we're having this conversation, because Jen and I have been able to get into the nuances of different large org from the inside introductions, because my experience was so different in that in a financial institution, there was not an interest in the science. It was more, don't talk to me about theory.
Science nerd. I don't want that.
Yeah. If you're going to say the word theory, I'm going to kick your legs out from under you and say, show me when you've got case studies. Show me when this has been proven somewhere else. Or show me when a regulator has approved this so that we know we can get away with it too. Some of that's valid to an extent, but it was highly risk averse like that. And you also had the questions available, is what I was hearing. You showed up and they were saying, how do we go roam the woods or understand the woods and that sort of thing. And that wasn't happening where I was. There was instead a lot of injured people that were saying, I'm feeling a lot of pressure top down to answer questions that they seem unanswerable, but that doesn't stop people from asking them. And it doesn't stop my job from being on the line to answer them. And if I can't answer them, then they're going to find somebody that can. And my walking into that was, how do I roll the science off of this and connect it at a human level? And how do I, instead of answering the questions that they have, instead tell them that they should have those questions, and the questions that they currently have, their sense of it being unreasonable is accurate, it's valid, and they shouldn't feel this pressure, but there are ways to work somewhere in between. So We need to talk about this a lot more.
I was gonna say, can I piggyback on that? Because I
Please.
actually highlighted the same thing in my head about one thing you said, Stephen, when you were like, okay, they were coming to us if they realized that, or if they exhausted the other forms of figuring stuff out, like your marketing data, your analytics, your economic modeling, like whatever it might be, go exhaust those first. And when you have yourself come to a realization that like those things aren't going to cut it, then they came to your strategy and innovation group, like kind of, hat in hand, ready to be like, let's see what else we can do. And I think that's really, really key, like in a way that may not even resonate at the surface level until anybody who's listening to this kind of thinks about, because I hear so many folks in our world try so hard to convince people to like do complexity instead of any of those things, like, or just, oh, come on, what are you even doing? Why waste your time? But there's something so key about acknowledging there are plenty of scenarios where all of those kind of methods or that data and those analytics function perfectly well. A complicated scenario that is ordered and predictable, give it some data and expertise and off you go. But to have people kind of arriving with that hunger, I think some people will hear that as a luxury. And to me, that just sounds like, no, you have to set up and frame what you offer is for when you've exhausted tools that are not meant for this kind of scenario.
Yeah, and it was a mixed kind of experience. One of the things is we were positioned as an internal resource instead of having to go and spend money on external consultants for new chairs of academic departments when they came in. It actually got put in their offer letter oftentimes. Hey, you can have a retreat here at the Strategy and Innovation office, and we'll help you with that. A lot of them were looking for some basic stuff. They're not coming to us for the things they're going to get from other departments. So we had a clinical strategy team. They do all of that sort of analysis. Let me tell you about your market, what's going on in the market. Let me tell you about your volumes, that kind of thing. But there's other things that, it's you aren't going to be able to analyze your way totally out of it. In the research realm, it's really about, well, what are our capabilities and where do we want to go? And what are the exciting research questions we can tackle, and who do we want to bring on board for that? Or in the education realm, it depended on where you are. Sometimes there are residency programs, for physicians who are getting trained that it's like, hey, we have a certain subspecialty. We don't have like a resident. Well, in that case, it would be a fellowship, which comes after residency. Like we really want to dig into this and expand that in some way, or whatnot. So a lot of them had those basic things, but I did have a lot of conversations where people came to us and they were like, hey, I'm wondering if you could help me with that. I'm like, I can ask reasonably good questions that would help you with that or take you on a journey. But I remember one case where it was an operating unit that was trying to scale the support for our clinics to the size we were getting. And they were realizing, hey, we're going to need to expand, get more involved. It's been more complicated. And I actually had a conversation with them that basically said, hey, I think this is a case where actually going to an external consulting agency or going to a number of your partners or competitors would actually be helpful because they're doing this at that scale already. This is not in the complex space. This is in the ordered space. There are ordered ways about it. Investigate those first. And then when you have stuff that's left, come back and we'll have a conversation. Or if you're trying to say, hey, the other thing I would offer, because I didn't want to say, we never want to say no.
Yeah.
But it was sort of like, if you're trying to make sense of it all and we can be helpful with that, why don't you bring that data back and then we can help you with that?
Yeah, that's so key. It reminds me too of so many times when way back in the day when I would be working on any kind of a project at the agency I was at for a long time that largely involved research, strategy, design, things of that sort. Forget the complex, complicated piece of it here. But we'd get to a point where the client would want what effectively would have been best served by someone else doing some kind of modeling or some kind of analysis. And I was like, you've got someone in-house who can do this and they'll do it cheaper and more effectively than us. And having that conversation was almost like almost a third rail to say, okay, here I am talking to a client who's paying me and I'm about to tell them, don't pay me the money you're trying to pay me for this because you're going to get a better outcome if you leverage another resource that is right in front of you. Obviously, I think a lot of us and folks in our world would say that's the right thing to do. It's the right thing for the right outcome. It's also the right human thing from a trust and credibility perspective. And yet so many of our working environments make that almost an impossible thing. Because even in my agency, which was full of people who would have wanted to, quote, do the right thing, it was always the pressure to, could we still find a way to do it? Can we do it and invoice for it? Because we have to make the money to keep the lights on and the payroll running. So I don't know. I mean, I just find that such an interesting. It's as good examples of this for people to hear.
Mhm.
I want people who watch this to hear
Yeah.
everything about what went well and also what went not well. But go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, no. So what's been coming up for me is one question I keep getting when I meet folks, especially folks that are recently out of school and getting into this, or newly getting into this. They want to know what industry to get into, and you both have a lot of experience in healthcare. I'm just finishing up my first year exposed to that. It feels different to me, coming from financial services now into healthcare. There seems to be a different response. I'm curious, both of your thoughts on, is this the place, or is there something here that is embedded that gives it some ability to adopt this that might not be present somewhere else?
Cue the Talking Head song, "This Must Be the Place," right? And it's like,
Right.
I mean, I'll give a short answer because I feel like Steven's going to have more interesting things to say. But there's an interesting contrast between even the environment that Steven's describing, working with lots of people with actual clinical or scientific expertise who they speak the language of science and jargon, not to be performative, but because they speak that language. And so that builds trust and credibility. A lot of the healthcare organizations that I've worked with over the years, despite being health, are generally organizations, whether they're provider organizations, hospital systems, whether they're pharma and life sciences, whether they're insurers and payers. Generally, the folks I'm working with are not scientists. They're not clinicians. They have a lot of respect for the clinicians in their ecosystem, but they are, as they would probably say it, mere humble business people. And so it's almost like a tale of two cities here between even Stephen and my healthcare experience. And I think that healthcare does offer a unique environment where people probably are primed to appreciate complexity informed practices, because of the fact that it is clearly complex. It's like one of the most visible and most complex systems that anybody sees. And it is accessible to everybody because we all interact with this system and bump up against its complexity constantly. So from like an emotional human standpoint, I think there's very good reason why we see healthcare referenced so frequently as examples, and it's a place that I think people are drawn to. But I also think it has the challenge of being the big, shiny object that you want to take your complexity toolkit and run headlong at. It's like the boss on an old Nintendo game with like the blinking part of the boss that you're trying to fire your arrows at. It's just like, hey, I'm right here. And what happens is everyone runs at it with their toolkit. And it's not lost on me the irony that you mentioned your background in financial with Cap One, but in healthcare, especially sort of say for like insurers and some others, this is happening everywhere. What happens like constantly is that you hear someone get involved and say, why isn't healthcare? I mean, it's so complex, but like, why aren't they doing it this way? Why aren't they doing that? Like, come on, this is so bureaucratic and God, why it's so Byzantine. Da, da, da. And then someone comes in convinced they're going to be able to change it and fix it. And then 6 months later, they go, oh my God, I did not appreciate the complexity of this. And I'm like, really? It was right in front of you. Take, for example, that insurers in particular and their vertical integration from not just being insurers, but having pharmacy and care organizations now folded within and supply chains. They are financial companies first now. And you can take a look at who gets hired into these companies, especially in the last few years. You get financial folks who worked in customer experience and design for financial companies come in waves into these organizations because it's like, we need to simplify this and make the experience better and make the care process better. And like, what are you guys doing? Let's bring what worked for us over here in financial or tech and bring it to healthcare. And then literally like 6 months later, you get the wave of them getting chewed and spit out. And it does become a pattern you get a little tired of watching. But to your point, Kyle, I think that healthcare is literally the blinking red light in front of everybody when you say complex system. And my world, it looks different. Stephen, I'm curious your response, because even the system within you worked looked different than the people I work with.
Yeah, and there were various areas that were different. So there were ones that were frequent clients and there were ones that not. And I'm some of it I think is the interaction between, Kyle, you were saying what are the questions they're raising, but sort of what are the situations they're facing? And also what is their dispositional state of response to that? So our most frequent client was in our educational enterprise. So we're an academic medical center, and that's associated with Vanderbilt School of Medicine. The transformation of our entire medical degree and the continuous improvement and innovation in there, that was a central client for us. They always were asking very interesting questions about stuff. They wanted to challenge themselves, and they respected areas, not just respected, but they really valued and saw the return, going on sort of exploration, in a reasonable way.
Yeah.
So kind of thing. And it's really hard when you're trying to pitch something that I was reading recently is, it's much like, I think I was reading an article on organizational development. How do you measure the outcomes of OD? It's an intangible kind of thing that, once you see the results of it and you believe in it, you're like, oh, wow, like this is actually important and I'm valuing it. But, until it's in the water and you can kind of feel out the connections with it, it's not. But I can't go on a chart and say, hey, this is the direct result of what you're doing. I know in our, community that the three of us are a part of, we've had periodic conversations of how do we measure impact. And I'd still be interested in how we measure impact in ways that might be different, but that you can actually see and that people say, yes, that is valuable to me to know that there's an impact. But, what is their response? So, and there was an article where recently I saw the term, competent failure. I think it's competent failure. Where I know too much for my own good, that I get stuck in what I know really well and don't release myself for something that's different, kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
failure of competency.
Failure of competence or whatever. I'm not speaking about anything that was in my environment, but Kyle, when you talk about, hey, what you faced in finance, well, to start with, they're really smart about how to do numbers. I mean, there's a lot of places where you can do magic with numbers that are just like, it answers a lot of questions. So, and it's I understand how it's hard for somebody who is so used to something that's so tangible in that way to make the leap to like this amorphous, I don't know if that's the right word, or just this thing that it's a more felt thing. It's an embodied thing. It's like, it seems theoretical to people. You got to like really conceptualize it. And, it's not that hard once you understand it, but it ain't like those numbers. It's not a spreadsheet.
Yeah, I think that's kind of been my read in the diagnostic space where I'm working. Is there most of the folks operate somewhere between the clinicians and the pharmaceutical space, somewhere in that trifecta, I guess, and then diagnostics in there as well. But I think they understand to an extent that the lab isn't. It's just that it's a place where there's play. There's a bit of like, I'm gonna try this thing, and so they know the value of that. But on the patient side, on the clinician side, there's an awareness of there's another human being right here, and I'm gonna have to face that human being at some point. Where I don't feel like that was ever part of the conversation in financial services. Theoretically, it was. There was a lot of like Joe customer conversations, but Joe customer might as well be just as invisible as anything else. It was very disconnected. And it's not to say that people weren't putting in the effort to empathize or that there weren't people that were actually like trying to do good things there, but it wasn't the same as having to attend to somebody at their bedside.
It's more visible, right?
In a critical moment.
Well, it's bodily, it's care.
Sure.
You see it. It's not your bank account. You don't really see it. If you've got a broken arm or you're struggling with depression, it's way more tangible in a way that, I mean, these things are also intrinsically linked between wealth and well-being and care and all that, but yeah, go ahead. I just had to.
Yeah, no, that's it. And when I would start to like hint at complexity a bit, there's not one way. The couple people, and this was in various conversations with unrelated people, they all said the same thing. It was like, yeah, this is how you treat a cold. Like they just kind of got that to an extent, that it's not a silver bullet. You kind of work around it essentially. And maybe that's, I would never tell anybody you approach a complexity the same way you approach a cold, but they were grasping something. They were grokking something that I wouldn't find in a lot of other environments good enough.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too, because as I'm listening to you guys talk about this, and the question of like healthcare, is this a place to go to venture into if you're looking for more fertile ground to do this kind of work? I mean, I think the short answer is like, sure, but it really has me thinking right now, like, healthcare is not really an industry. I think it's bigger than that. I mean, because you can just name all the different facets that we just rattled off. And also, I think it's important to recognize that this is probably true in every industry. People end up in places, organizations, cultures, environments, in the working world, not necessarily always by conscious choice, but you mentioned earlier, Stephen, about dispositions. Like, there is something to remember about if someone ends up in a financial space, they might have been drawn to that for whatever reason, but they have self-selected into that world. And yes, we don't all have like total, complete 100% agency in where we move, and there's all these factors that shape it. But I often remind myself when I'm working with an organization that, on some level is trying to do good, but it's doing it in the world with a profit, motive first and foremost, and fiduciary legal responsibility to make shareholders happy on a quarterly basis, like long-term thinking be damned. And so in those organizations, it's easy to kind of at the zoom out level say, this is broken and bad. But on the zoom in level, there are humans who work at these organizations who are there literally because it has the word health attached to it. And they want to take their skills, whatever they are, accounting, answering phones, working in spreadsheets, but they want to do it in the service of health, which feels like it has a value that I as a human can support. And so like, I'm at the point in this conversation where I'm like, holy cow, I think actually it's problematic to even think of healthcare as an industry because that's too narrow. Healthcare is like humans being human. And like within it is like many industries, many, many, many industries. So I never really was able to like kind of consciously figure out why when people, even in the days when I was at MadPow, and we did a lot of work in healthcare, and people would come to work at MadPow and they'd say, I wanted to work at MadPow because we do so much work in health. And I'm like, what does that mean? Do you want to design wayfinding for children's hospitals? Do you want to improve the R&D process or clinical trial experience for pharma companies? Do you want to work with the diagnostic space? Do you want to help a pharma company deny more prior authorizations? Like, these are wildly different facets of work that are supposed to all fall under one umbrella, which is just mind-blowing to me. There, I've killed the conversation.
Yes.
Only took me 30 minutes.
No, that was a mic drop. That was good. I like that.
Okay, Kyle.
Yeah. I mean, to affirm it, I don't know if this affirms it. I remember early in my time, we would have it was a physical map. It was a physical like family tree of all the healthcare businesses in Nashville. So I'm located in Nashville, Tennessee. It's known as a major healthcare hub. We got, national healthcare companies that are based here. We got all kinds of other businesses. We have businesses, subsidiaries of businesses, subsidiaries of businesses. So, and it was like this whole tree that came down from 5 businesses locally. Yes. And it was always interesting to look at it. And it, and it had all those flavors of everything. I mean, it's huge. Yeah. It is a massive kind of thing and everybody needs it. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, I was going to make a little of a left turn, but if there was, Kyle, were you about to say something that's still on this topic?
I was thinking if I was going to think about something. So
what does that mean?
I was considering thinking about something. No, go take a left turn.
I just want to hear from Stephen now about like some where did things go wrong, some mess ups, some challenges. Give us your stories that you normally wouldn't want to share publicly.
Share some battle scars.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I have to, I have to make sure. I have to de-identify,
Wait,
thankfully it's
Right.
not HIPAA,
yeah.
but
Let me say
Yeah.
this: if you share something that later you're like, we can go cut it out. But
oh yeah,
I
no.
also want to say, and Kyle and I have talked about this recently on one or two of our other episodes. Case studies. Everybody wants case studies, at least on the surface, because it helps make things concrete. Maybe it just gives them some level of like hope and aspiration that this work can happen. But we also know that negative case studies and stories of failure and stories of learning and all
Yeah.
that are like so much more both instructive
Mhm.
and compelling. So you're going to do the
Yeah.
world a favor here by giving us a few of
I
those,
mean,
or at
I'll
least
give
one.
you I'll give you some minor ones. I don't
Sure.
think this is anything about complexity, but it just starts the ball rolling. So
Mhm.
on our team, we once had a session where we had two sponsors who clearly through the whole kind of engagement. So, and to give context for people, in my work, at my prior job, a lot of it was set in the context of workshops. So we were planning for a workshop, we did a workshop, we got some results from it. That's just the way it was. So they were doing this workshop. They were doing actually two workshops, and these folks were on different ends of it of the situation. They were not aligned, and you could see it going through. And it was a small workshop, but you got to this point where that misalignment, like the workshop wasn't going to resolve it. So we actually had to send them off into a corner and say, please go resolve this question right now, or whatever it is. And then they come back and everything, because it was just not going to work and everything. And, so it's advice to say like, hey, if you feel there's not alignment in that buildup, especially among your sponsors, even if you got it wrong, like you really need to resolve that before you bring it in the room with everybody else, because it's just going to come out,
Mm,
kind of thing.
mm,
I think also a very practical thing is, executive sponsors who are getting very in the weeds, and, for whatever reason, there might be executives who are truly sponsoring it, but hey, they're busy people. Especially I dealt with a lot of layers of executive roles and everything. And there are senior executives who need something to land, but they don't need to be in the weeds of it. And they got a good person that reports to them that's going to handle it. We had some very good situations where there was a recurring client that was a board of a local subsidiary. It was more than a subsidiary. It wasn't a partnership. I forget all the technical terms, but we would do their annual board retreat, and the head of all of that would go to the chair of the board and say, hey, this is what we're doing. And this is what, and he trusted him and everything. And we would not get a lot of just, sort of like left turns from
mm.
that sort of dynamic. And it worked great. But I've had cases where it's like you're having meetings after meetings for meetings to prepare for meetings. And that's just a sign that no, you're either in the conversation or out of the conversation. So that's just, what those are the things that come to mind or whatnot on it.
Mm.
I think also, I mean, you want to talk about scar tissue. I will tell you about the first time we did estuarine mapping from Dave Snowden.
Yes.
So
Let's go.
you want to hear about it. So it was literally as he was blogging, hey, I think all of these things that we've been talking about, that I've been talking about in blogs and others, are coming together. I'm calling it estuarine mapping. This is what I think it is. And for anybody who knows Dave, you got to learn first. He figures things out by teaching it, and he might sound more confident in it. And he's confident in it, but it might sound like it's more baked, because usually when people talk confidence, it sounds like it's a done deal. He learns through putting it out there. So we were doing something, and there was a client situation where I'm like, we've tried everything. We actually tried three other things in like two or three other things in previous workshops we did with this client. It wasn't working. It was about dynamics of people in the workplace kind of thing, or, whatnot. So I said, I cannot unlearn this. I think this is the key to it. We're going to try it. But it wasn't at the point where it was already set up like, oh, we're going to do it. Here's step 1, step 2, step 3. Generally in an activity that I can turn to a client, I can turn to participants in the room and go, hey, here's what we're going to do next. Here's how we're going to do it. So me and my colleague Angela were literally in the, kind of building this thing up to the point that the morning we were doing it, I was even tuning language on Slack. So here's Dave off in Wales. God, it's in the afternoon there, and it's
Or
7
walking
a.m.
up in the woods or in the
6:30 a.m. in
hills, right?
Nashville, and I'm typing away like in open Slack, okay, how would you phrase this concept? Can I do this, this, and this? Is this an alternative? Because I don't think this is going to work with this, folks, and we're going back and forth. So it had some success to it, but it is not what I would recommend doing. Make sure you have it built there together and whatnot, and test run it. It was a little bit of an experiment, but we got it. I did, pass it through some people who were on the, sponsor team, or, sort of around the sponsor team, to say, hey, does this make sense to you? So, it was like, okay, that was, it just met the threshold of safe to fail pro, but, maybe we could have pulled it a little back there, but, making sure it's clear going through that. And I know, that sort of also reflects, I think, Jen, Kyle, and I have different styles in terms of our facilitation. We were even having a conversation yesterday about that, about something we're doing coming up. And, whatever it is, I think it's really about making sure whatever the container it is and the expectations you set with the client, that you're meeting those in what you're doing.
Yeah.
So the containers we had to deal with were squeezed down into 4 hours. Now, I would never create a scope that you could not achieve reasonably in 4 hours. But if you're going to do it in 4 hours, it's kind of like, well, there are some things that you need to give space for, and there may be other things that I'm like, okay, how do I accelerate this one? And actually, some of the nicest innovations in how we executed S-join mapping on mid to medium, sort of mid-level organization issues were, came out of, well, how do I get this done in 20 minutes and not making it ridiculous?
Yeah.
So, for example, there were a couple steps in the process where we said, hey, let's have individuals do it first and just get it out there, and then give more time for the entire group to validate it. Because we saw cases where people were going so deep into valid rabbit holes, but they lost total loss of time.
Yeah.
And we didn't have that luxury to, you can go for 8 hours or whatever. And they're like, no. So we're like, hey, how do we balance that? And it turned out pretty well. On the S-join mapping front, we, if you wanted to do it in 4 hours on a mid-level thing, we figured out how to do that, I would say, pretty damn well. And had figured out all the instructions to do it and some permutations on it. And, one of the interesting things that we didn't get to do before our operation was actually shut down due to circumstances the medical center didn't want, no harm, no foul on their part or ours. We were actually using it to frame, how do you build people up in terms of strategic thinking? Because it was really resonating with folks. And as we talked to our learning team and some of the other resources they had, it was really a lot of older ways of looking at it that you were like, I struggle with offering this to a leader, but I think we have something here with the S-join mapping that we can actually describe it, or, that it actually helps people build up their strategic thinking abilities.
That's really interesting. Because I've seen some inklings of that too. And I haven't really seen a lot of folks really, other than there is folks there, they are looking at S-join mapping for coaching. And whether that's in individual coaching settings or group coaching, I'm not totally sure. I'm keeping sort of an eyeball on it, but that world is adjacent. It's not my world. So, but I've seen the same in an organizational setting. And like, kudos to you, Stephen, because I think you were the first person who even shared what you've just described around you can do some of this work individually. You can have folks do some thinking in sort of a pre-work way and not lose the integrity of the process. Because for my instinct to get out there and start playing with S-join mapping, my instinct would always be, let's get in the room and do this together. Although what you're describing too about doing some of it individually first, also like echoes for me the way that people nowadays, if they want to do brainstorming, it's like everybody write their ideas first on their own. Just give yourself some brain space. Although brainstorming as its own concept is a problem, but nonetheless,
if I can just speak to that right away, it's just a matter of, are you predisposing somebody to a line of flight of thinking too early?
Exactly.
Because all you're going to do is you run the risk in a group of people that if you start listening to somebody else, even if you have a lot of good ideas to give and you are eager to give them, your brain's going to start processing on what they're saying.
Yeah,
So
you can't.
parallel processing actually bleeds into that Snowden talks about parallel processing can bleed into that edge of chaos. Or, well, he also talks about if you get that normal distribution curve of thought,
Right.
there'll be dominant, a lot in the middle, there'll be tails. Otherwise, you start doing that and it turns into a Pareto distribution. Everybody sort of gravitates in a place and there's a movement going on. It may not be a bad movement, but you don't know unless you give the space to like, give me the normal distribution first and then get it out. So
well, you're sharing, which is always has been so generous, but your willingness to share what you've tried and seen in some of the spaces that we all collaborate or talk to people in, that gave me some of that those ideas and some confidence to try the same. Because I would be trying it, to this day, I would still be, let's always do this in the room together, even if we're going to have people do individual first and then start getting together as a group. But having some confidence to say, nah, you know what? Let me give folks some of these prompts to think about in advance. Maybe I have them complete something in advance via a survey collection tool or whatever it might be. It doesn't replace some important part of that can then be enriched in the group together. But I think that like you kind of have for a long time occupied this space as a bit of a pioneer. And what is nice about that is that you weren't just doing it, you were sending letters back home for the rest of us to be like, okay, out there on the Oregon Trail or planting fields of, building an agricultural society on the other side of the country. We're back over here like, okay, let's try this here. So yeah, man, cheers to that.
Yeah. I was going to say this is where we met because we're on the Slack channel and I remember you going through that process with Dave as you're talking about it. I had forgotten about it, but it is coming back to me now, overloading and the back and forth. And then you were journaling basically the whole process and we were getting Darwin's journal essentially. And excellent. So this is where I said, like, let's connect. I need to pick your brain a bit and figure out how you're actually doing this because I'm in Capital One trying to do similar. I hadn't gone into the estuarian mapping side yet. I was in the middle of SenseMaker work at that point, but yeah, just needed to learn. And I was surprised how you had entered into it and just picked it up and run with it, and it had just gone. And what I'm curious about, because this was always a thing for me to spend so much time crafting, and it's what everyone asks about. How do we get that language? How do we get the buy-in? All that kind of stuff. You went into estuarian mapping with your first your first workshop with an incomplete guide, having never done it before and no formal training, and nobody had ever said, here's a case study on how it works. And somehow you got clinicians who now I'm trying to get to fill out a survey, and I'm being told, just so you know, clinicians don't have time for anything. They've got they eat their meals or they drink their meals while they're running from one place to another, and they're not going to give you 12 minutes to fill out a survey. How did you get 4 hours from a group of clinicians to do something you've never done before that hasn't been proven or even come off the whiteboard yet?
Yeah, so it happened with a client, so that was a recurring client, so there was a safety there. It happened in an event that was a recurring event with this client, so there was already a container there. I didn't have to sell, let's create the container. And in that recurring event, it happened on a topic that they were bringing regardless. So it wasn't a question of, I wasn't sitting there looking necessarily for, what can I go try this on? It was the reverse. I landed on something that it just happened at the same time. I was like, this seems like the right way, and you can run the risk, of course, it's the flavor of the month kind of thing. But truthfully, they were needing to map the dynamics that were going on in the situation to see which ones they could pull on, because they were trying to pull on things and it wasn't working, kind of thing. So it met the criteria of appropriate use for the method, even in retrospect. Like if they had come with the same situation today, still would have recommended the same thing, probably would have been tighter on it, kind of thing. So I think that's what allowed the space that they, as long as they were confident. And the final thing is that the work we did to move it across the threshold from complex to complicated, because that's really what we did. I mean, it might not have been the right, the best version, but it was a first version of moving it across the threshold. Made it possible. Because the one thing from a stylistic standpoint, from how we operated our workshops and how I continue to sort of look at how I would operate, a facilitated workshop, is generally speaking, we try to create certain kinds of order without that allow for the emergence. So there's a lot of things we put in, that I would probably be different from complex facilitation. Yeah, I'm not going to give you all the instructions, but the instructions I'm going to give you, I'm going to damn well make sure they are clear and that they are simple, kind of thing. Or that they are reasonable. Like, you understand, here's the task I'm trying to perform. That you're not sitting here trying to orient yourself or confusing, with it a lot, that kind of thing. So I think I couldn't have done that with another client. I mean, there were 30 people in that particular activity. It was 4 hours. It was high enough, it was a little bit of a higher profile kind of nature of a problem. Like, I couldn't have done it with another client because we didn't have that established relationship and trust and the process that we went through to take it over the threshold. So
I love everything about that. We need to highlight that as a clip, because
Absolutely.
Here's what I heard, 2 things for sure. One, you didn't sell the container for this alongside the solution. You had already been through other types of engagements. You had built this container, you had built the trust and credibility. So now you don't have to sell the container for it. You have the container, and all you get to do now is bring a new tool into it or some new content into it. I think that is something that folks who are earlier in their career journeys trying to bring some of these methods into their work, pay attention to that, guys, because it is so key. And the other thing is talking about as you change, you were I didn't go hunting for a place to use this. You weren't a tool in search of a thing to tool on. You weren't a solution in, you earlier today, Kyle, in a totally different setting, mentioned the dentist's tools. We are kind of walking around with a tray of these tools, and like a dentist's tray, some of these tools are familiar, like a toothbrush and some floss. Some of these tools look downright terrifying. Do not bring that near my mouth. Okay. And you have to kind of be careful if you're walking around with either one tool that I'm just looking for somewhere I can finally do this, or even the whole tray of tools. Hi guys, you are going to scare so many people away. So the fact is, being kind of always sensing for if there is a fit, great, I can now bring this in. But you were not estrogen mapping, running around looking for somewhere to land. And that is so key too. That is so key.
Correct.
Yeah, this was a story of serendipity. This is what I heard. You had something available, and the thing presented itself, and you knew how to take that opportunity. And that's a lot of it. And like you said, Jen, it's establishing that base to begin with. And this is where those compromises start coming in, where I get people will come in and say, can you just build me a journey map for this thing? And I'm like, it's probably not what you want, but if I fight you on this, you're just going to find somebody that's going to do it for you. And that's going to be it. But if I do it and it's unsatisfying, then you at least, and I can offer something, then we might be able to move on from there. But yeah, I'm wondering what kind of compromises that you might have had to have made.
You led right into where my brain went.
Yep.
So, and Kyle, you know this story. So one of the things I was trying to do in the final year of, in over several of the past years, was I had encountered, with the Cynefin Company, their platform SenseMaker and their approaches to narrative-based research. And I really felt and continue to feel there's a lot of potential and power with it. And I wanted to bring it in. I work in a corporate environment. Every corporate environment handles new IT and cloud products differently. And I was in a risk-averse environment for good reason. We've had a lot of everybody buying their tools over the years, especially when you have academics around and you're trying to control creep. You're trying to make sure we're not creating manageable situations from IT perspective and whatnot. And I'm a former IT professional. I get all that. I mean, that's even before we get to cybersecurity. cybersecurity review. I understand that too. So the threshold to just bring in even the seemingly, what would say is a low risk tool or a medium to low risk tool is high. And what I needed was the right level of an executive endorsement to do that. And so what I had to figure out was, how can I give enough of an experience of this to say it is worth it? So what we did is we basically did the SenseMaker engagement without SenseMaker. So none of the more advanced question types that you might see. For those of you familiar, there's triangles. There could be like, sort of plots, or what they call stones, where you can put it on an image, or you can put it somewhere on a graph or something. We did a very simple story collection. And again, it was something where the situation came to us while I was, keeping my ears open. I wasn't trying to force something in. They were in a situation where they said, hey, we're trying to get folks in one of our clinical environments used to the fact that we are always going to be 24/7 open and operating at full capacity. It is the nature of, we got a lot of different environments in that medical center. It's one of those environments where that was the case. So it was, hey, we've done everything in terms of process improvement, but we think there's something else holding us back. Well, I then said, well, I'm curious what the stories from the workforce would tell us. For example, are the stories, are there whirlpools of thinking that are just holding people back from taking that leap? That if we change the narrative a bit, you can change the possibility. Alternatively, the one that I was less focused on, but turned out to be actually more sort of helpful, or the executive saw more insightful in the moment, was what were the insights that were coming through that were not coming through the same way in their other process reengineering work. That is not to say this is a replacement for all the process reengineering that is valid and you need to do, but it was an additive component that gave insights where one of our chiefs of staff said, this gave me more insight than my annual employee survey results. And it was, I think we got 100 responses from a workforce of a couple thousand, and it was messy, it was dirty, it was everything. I mean, from a data analytics perspective, you wouldn't want to do this and say, I put this in a peer review study, but it was enough that it gave some kind of like some, insight that triggered a shift for those executives, or they were like, hey, we either know we need to go do this that we weren't going to do differently, or it more strongly affirms something we already thought was happening. So we definitely need to go do X. So, I mean, that's where I had to make so many compromises. In that case, we actually used Tableau. We modeled it in a survey, a REDCap, which is a very common survey tool in academic research in the healthcare space. We collected it in REDCap. We created a dashboard in Tableau. But I was actually on the verge. I got an approvals and everything because it was like, look, the cost was reasonable to just try it. And then what I was going to do is just try it on a project per project level at a per project cost until we actually crossed over the threshold. So, and then the analytics guy said, look, I also asked my analytics guy, what would you do? You see what this is? And he's like, you have a platform that can do this. Buy it. The building of it is too much. So all the pieces were coming together. So, I mean, and going back to, we talk about estuarine mapping, we talk about saying, what's the landscape of what's going on? What can I affect? What can I not affect? How can I change? So, I had effects on what I could do. And then I saw where I could move things over that boundary of things that I can't change to a place where I can actually impact it and move it to the next stage.
Yeah.
This isn't something we talk about enough. It needs to be, though, because I think so many people are looking for what's that ideal state where I can have my two days to bring in all of the stakeholders I want to bring in and run the full workshop. How do I get my full software package installed so I can do this the right way? How do I get all of the allowances to do this the exact way that it was instructed? And I don't know if I've ever been in that sort of scenario. Like we call this guerrilla research in design often. Not that we do this exactly what you were doing. I've never heard of anything like that, Stephen. But the idea of like we're just going to work scrappy, and even if what we come out with is to say we've generated better questions and shown the ineffectiveness of the tools that we have right now, those are great cases to say we need to move forward, ask those questions, and get better tools. Win-win. But that's rarely part of the strategy when I talk to people. They're sitting down and saying, how do I install the ideal scenario? And I think we need to talk about this so much more that that's not it. The first thing is find a whiteboard, turn a Google sheet into the tool that you want it to be. Find 30 minutes and run the 4-hour workshop that you want to try with 3 people and see what happens, and let it escalate from there. And that's what I'm hearing in a couple of these stories. Is a lot of it was it wasn't like there was a great situation there where you had people asking good questions and they were already poised for this and they had a lot of knowledge, but you didn't come in and say, excellent, you can have everything you want. I'm putting a bow on it. Merry Christmas. You were also had to go in and say, well, we're going to sort of build this from the ground up, and it's going to be ugly and it's going to be dirty and it's going to have tape all over it and it's going to, but deal with it. And it went from there. Well, that's awesome.
I think this is probably the most you'll hear me talk about anything political in a public setting. Is no matter where you are in any issue, if you look at political movements or things that have happened in a significant way, in whichever way, in a lot of different parts of the world, including here in the United States over, say, the past like 50 years, you can trace the sort of play-by-play movement that it's not like, hey, I need to have the big bang. It's like small movements that are changing the situation, iteratively into a place where then there's this huge shift over a span of time that suddenly people are waking up on any side of issue saying, what happened? And what's more interesting to me from a history standpoint, I lived through history where they went through like, let me tell you about every single battle in, whatever war. Like what's more interesting to me is like those kinds of socio-political, movements, little shifts that built up to, wow, we went from here to there. That, how did that happen? And it's like, oh, wow, that's how that happened. So
I'm just looking right now. I'm going to see if I can find it. There's a really good book on this topic that you've maybe read, Stephen. I don't know. I can't remember the name or the author. It's so bad. I'll find it though, in case anybody listening wants to, because like 100% to everything you just said. And Kyle and I have said this probably on this podcast, whatever this thing is, or in other places in other recordings. Like there's so much here that is about realizing sometimes you have to do the not perfect thing to earn the trust to do the perfect thing, or do the wrong thing to get to the right thing, or take all the little kind of not right, maybe wrong things, build a bridge on top of those to the right thing. And of course, there's no right and wrong, right? So throw that away anyway. But all of that is really key. But it's got me actually really wondering about, like, the three of us seem pretty comfortable with that. We didn't come out of the womb that way, I assume. Like we probably had to go through some life experiences that got us to a place where we recognized sometimes something's got to be jerry-rigged. Something you gotta MacGyver a thing with non-ideal parts or circumstances or relationships. And I'm wondering like what it is. And I'm doing a fast scan right now. For example, I think a lot of this for me was kind of like hard programmed in, like very aggressively in the early days of being a teacher. When you're a classroom teacher in a high school setting, ain't nothing going to be perfect, or how you got taught or what you got told to do when you were in teacher training or in the pedagogy that you were trained on, whatever it might be. And I don't think anybody goes into teaching expecting it to be like that, but it's pretty fast that you suddenly are like, okay, fire drill, got to change what we're doing here, but still kind of try to do this thing, or have to modify this in this way, figure it out on the fly. There's so much of this, like, do the wrong thing to get to the right thing, and recognize you're teaching something that over time is going to gain resolution. You're kind of teaching the quote wrong thing to earn the platform on which to later enrich it to the right thing. And again, I hate the wrong right. I think of more like resolution in pixels. Give them the blurry version so later you can fill the blurry in with more resolution. Kyle, I'm sure some of the music production background here is the same
Oh yeah.
situation. I'm sure Stephen, like there's got to be, you mentioned you worked in IT. I know you've got sort of a learning and action research background too. Like I want to hear from you guys on this. Is there anything here? Like what is it that gets a person to a place where they don't just listen to what we're saying, but can actually feel it and grok it and say, all right, I got to get some practice doing this so I get comfortable with it.
um the imposed, so I think we were
Well,
talking about this.
let me, sorry, frame it this way in case you're kind of
Yeah.
like, what am I responding to? What I'm kind of wondering about is, feels like the three of us kind of get this, more
Right.
comfortable with it. This
How do we
idea
help?
about do the wrong thing on the way to the right thing.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
lot of people that we bump into in our communities seem a little bit more itchy about that, you know, whether they've been trained as designers or whatever else in a world, in an environment where it's, this is how it really should happen. I don't even mean like a rigid personality thing about like, we must follow this, I'm a type A, but more, this is how it's supposed to go. I've been taught to advocate and fight for this, you know, from like an empathy and human-centered sense. And so there's something in the comfort with letting something be slightly corrupted and degraded and still work with it. Where does that comfort come from?
So I might have told, I don't think I've told this story before, certainly not here. So yeah, when I was starting to make music, like end of high school or so, I was making mostly electronic music and I was collecting a lot of instruments, but they're expensive for a 18-year-old to go pick up. They're much, much more expensive today. Stuff I was buying for $80 at a yard sale are going for 8,000 on Reverb now. So it's a whole different world. But back then I had a nice little collection. I thought I was going to be able to do stuff. And then my car got broken into and all of it was stolen. And I was in this community of musicians who were primarily experimental musicians. And one of them, who was pretty well known in that world, Mark Spivey, I was in a lot of despair. Like, man, I was building up. I was trying to get that perfect scenario of, I almost had all of the gear that was on my Christmas list. And he kind of pulled me aside and said, I've got a little assignment for you. Take a microphone. He does electroacoustic kind of stuff. He samples a lot of just random sounds and then tries to orchestrate them together. Just go into your refrigerator and make some sounds. And what I didn't know is I was learning how to do sound design, which I would ultimately apply. I was learning how to record things I didn't know how to record, and I was learning miking technique and all of these sort of things, which ultimately I brought into my sound engineering world. But it started with this expectation of what making really is, what done actually really looks like, what forward progress can be. I had this sort of distant goal of, once it's like golfers. Like, if I get the right clubs, my game will get that much better. I kind of had that same with like music gear. If I get all the right stuff, I'll be able to make the music that I want.
Get the right framework, it'll take care of itself.
Bingo, exactly. If I get the right org, if I get the right like leadership, then this will all fall into place. If somebody will just sign this contract for me so I can bring in this third party, then it'll all come together. And none of that works out the way that we expect it to, almost ever. But forward progress actually happens in these small moves that we were just talking about. I think you were talking about Adam Kahane's Daily Habits for Transforming Systems.
No,
He
I
talks
looked it
about
up.
this.
Yeah,
And from that socio-political sense too, of like how it all starts with just a couple different conversations mingling. But yeah, I think I needed ahas like that to start to get conditioned, but it was that reframing of what done, or if there is a done, everything being a work in progress was what I ultimately had to accept when I started looking at what my ADHD and all of my started projects, my begun projects that will never get completed, the graveyard of incomplete projects, stopped becoming framed as the graveyard of incomplete projects and started becoming the building blocks of whatever project I'm on now. It was the thing that I learned that I didn't want to finish because my attention was somewhere else. And the reframing of that is everything. So, I don't know that there's a like, you just read this passage out of Nietzsche and it will click. Although Nietzsche was helpful in that somehow, because he likes to talk about reframing. But Uh,
I humbly look forward
does
to
it?
the day that this particular podcast conversational series is in the graveyard of ideas for Kyle.
It will be a
Go
stepping
ahead.
stone to an evolution of whatever.
Let me say really fast, and then I obviously want to hear from Stephen.
Yeah.
The book I thought of though, or that I was just referencing, is called "The Quiet Before" on the unexpected origins of radical ideas. Gal Beckerman. So more from the social and historical perspective that what Stephen was saying earlier, that book is kind of on that topic that Stephen alluded to. So if anybody wants to check it out, it's good. Anyway, go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, no, I was trying to figure out where, it's hard for me to kind of pinpoint an experience, or a set of experiences where I suddenly where my brain would start seeing like, oh, here's the path, kind of thing. I think, maybe it's a neurodivergence, maybe it's something else, but some people are more conducive to like, oh, if we do this, then this, then this, then boom, kind of thing. I've even had conversations with colleagues recently where they were like, I don't know about this. And, it seems like there's something here, but this is what's frustrating. I'm like, oh my God, you're sitting on like a gold mine here. Like if we do this and then this and then that, you suddenly have here's three options, and I was like, can't you see what's sitting in front of you, for pity's sake? Or, I was in one particular student organization in college. I had a lot of student government in college. So the notion of how do you do influence and understand what's going on in an organization and whatnot? I was not the student body president, but I was known for getting stuff done. A lot
This
of it.
explains a lot, Stephen. This is good to
Yeah.
know.
So,
You were the whip. Nice.
yeah, no, it didn't take a. It was
You're the
like,
hand of
who
the
can I
king is what
influence?
you are, hand
Right.
of the king.
Understanding who all the players are and who's got the cards and that sort of thing. And there was one student organization I was in that while I was there, I was pushing boundaries, but I was pushing them until I knew where the boundary was with the university. And then and one of the faculty came up after a particular encounter and said, are you comfortable with some interaction I had just had that was sort of like where the hard no was sort of set on something? I said, yeah, because now I know what my space is to work in.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of space to work in. But, especially, I went to a Catholic university and whatever. And, if people get caught up in certain sociopolitical topics that the Catholic Church, they have to kind of hold the line a bit on certain things, even if the people themselves maybe don't want to. They get really frustrated. I'm like, you do realize this is a Catholic university and there are limits to that. Like, but you, and I kept saying from a distance at one point, like, you have all this space to work in. Why are you worried about, you fill that first and then go for, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, I definitely want to concur with the framing, that, how do we understand and ask, okay, if I don't have this, it helps me to then start asking, what do I do have? Because let me see what I have and I can work with,
Yeah.
and so, I mean, that's important. So I also think, Kyle, you were alluding to it, but there are different kinds of roles or things that we do in our lives that sort of build that, whether it's scrappiness, whether it's understanding dynamics. I talked about student government. It's not a guarantee, but political or anything, or just managerial roles where you have to lead with influence. Actually, there's been a lot where, because I wasn't in a managerial role, but I had a lot of executive clients, like I had to do things through influence, through persuasion or whatnot. And then on the flip side, I've been a long-time homeowners association president. You don't get to command what is happening there. You have to influence, persuade, and then, and say, okay, what's reasonable and that sort of thing there. I mean, this is not a kingdom. So with that, but also like theater, like any person, especially if they've done, sets or, any of that, having to put together community theater or school theater. I mean, they know how to pull stuff together and make it happen. When we did our workshops, we would always love to hire people who have theater background for the back of the room kind of roles. We actually delineated between those. We were all a team, but we really valued our back of the room role, so to speak, because they really made the magic happen and they could make anything happen.
Mm.
Theater people do it. There's a number of, I think, people in military that I've known that they learn through their military experience how to, like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to figure it out. So where people have had to, just deal with what they get. I think also, to some degree, people who train as chefs or any sort of line kitchen, anybody who's not just, hey, tell me what I'm putting together, give me a recipe, but like, okay, this is what I got. What can I do with it? One of my, actually, my favorite restaurant in Nashville, which they say they're closing. Margot Cafe says they're closing, but we're just all hoping it's going to stay alive in some way, shape, or form. They build it on the ingredients that are available from their farmers that week. And the menu evolves over the week. Sometimes Sunday's, meal is the most exciting of all the days because of the ingeniousness of what they're putting together. So I think it's really those roles where they're like, I know what to do with this.
You've literally just like gone through all of like the most like valuable metaphors that I feel like a lot of us end up having to use in our work. I just cannot. I love this. I love all of it. And it's, in some ways, I think it's also valuable to remember that like a lot of people who work in those kind of environments, they're not using the language of complexity or evolutionary biology or, da 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 da. They would see if you described it to them, the Rosetta Stone, that these things are parallel. They're the same ideas written in different language or through different lenses. But this might just be because of activities earlier today pertaining to service design. But I thought when you especially were talking about the theater, I thought of how in a lot of either service design or organizational design or development or anything kind of oriented around orchestration and ops, you get some kind of like visualization in service design. It's a service blueprint, but you get this metaphor that usually accompanies of it that is the metaphor of orchestration. And how beautiful to juxtapose or to put the contrast between you talking about why you value a person with theater experience and the way that like behind the scenes they're helping enable, they're both mediating and facilitating and enabling, I guess, altogether that experience. And it ain't because somebody made a seamless, airtight service blueprint, or, you probably got a plan somewhere that's very airtight in that sense, but it isn't because it's been orchestrated. It's because you have humans in the room who are able to respond to anticipate certain things, maybe to preempt things if needed, but then to really be able to act with what is at hand at any point in time, knowing that will shift. So I just loved it. As you were talking about the theater, I'm like, yeah, this is such an interesting, juicy contrast with the way theater shows up in a lot of, at least for me and Kyle in our world, theater shows up as a metaphor for the front stage, backstage parts of a service blueprint that are meant to orchestrate all of this. And yes, in theater, there's the book and there's all the pieces and the cues. But anyway, I feel like every single one of those examples you just gave is lovely and perfect. I want to hear more about the homeowner association role.
No, that stays here.
That might be trouble.
Where's the shot?
That was a little juicy. Yeah, this is fascinating because I was just having a conversation with somebody earlier this week about how we build the competencies for this work, but also how we not just recognize each other with our title, but how we frame our competencies, our capacity, our experiences in a way that says I'm capable, or I'm ready for this, or I want to continue on this. And it's funny the way that our institutions of here's how we get hired and here's how we write CVs and here's how we interview don't really support this so well, because I would say I would interview somebody, and if they came in and said, I worked theater and I worked Scrappy and I was a chef and I did all this, and I'd say, great, well, I can show you how to use Mural and how to move boxes around and type stuff into it. That's not the competency. The competency is to be able to work Scrappy like that. It's to be able to see interconnections and have some respect for that. It's to be able to recontextualize things and kind of float between some of these domains. But that's not a role that says I worked in 10 years in domain fluidity. Nobody does that. So how do we
we need an accreditation or maybe like a program where you get certified as like a scrappy MacGyver complexity guy, or
Something.
is there like a I'm a
Yeah.
certified
Yeah.
We need like
figure it out.
like I don't know, like a D&D sheet or something like that that has our
Well,
our ability scores and these weird competencies.
I've been thinking about this a lot recently because there's definitely those moments where executives and teams are looking for something that they either find in somebody else that's in their sphere. It's like, that's my go-to person, that's my fixer, that's the person I give all the messy projects to, that's the person I give the intractable stuff to. Or it's like, I don't know who to go to who's going to help me solve this. And they start knocking on doors of fill in the blank consultancy that, I wonder, are they knocking on that door because they know, hey, I've had an experience, they've been able to do it, therefore, I'm going to go back to you because you can fix it? Or it's like, or is it a, hey, Deloitte, McKinsey, or whatnot are so big, they will have somebody that'll fix it, which is a reasonable thing. There are certain entities that are so big that if they don't have it, they'll hire it, they'll figure it out. Now whether they do it in a way that's truly helpful or not, that's a whole nother conversation.
yeah.
But I think it's there's so many domains that intersect with the kind of stuff we do. Like, Kyle, you resonate a lot, unless you tell me otherwise, with the service design community. I would never label myself in the service design space, kind of thing. But, and is it something, well, here's how we integrate into others, or is it a thing unto its own sometimes? And if so, what is it? I think about that. And what's the language for this subspecialty? So I think of it, in terms of like, in healthcare, we have, there's primary care, there are specialties, there are subspecialties, kind of thing. So, and I have recently described myself as an administrative subspecialty. And it's really rare that you would have this administrative subspecialty sitting inside a company. Although, if we could name it and, kind of give not just give a name and, like write it as a job description, but give something that an executive who's like, why would I add an FTE for this?
Yeah.
Would be able to say yes or no. And the no would not be because I don't know what I'm going to do with this. The no is hey, I don't have enough of this, I'd go to a consultancy for it. That at least they know what they're getting.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And I don't know if we're there yet, or it doesn't feel like we're there.
No, and it's interesting too, because like I don't know if you see this, Stephen, but like we're at least in the designer world that like Kyle and I have 2 more toes in probably than average. Like there's a lot of language like I'm the connective tissue. I'm a weaver, I'm a connector, I'm a bridge builder. Interstitium as both a metaphor and an actual organ that's now recognized in the body, that is like all the stuff around the other stuff that was kind of just assumed to be like nothing, and now it actually is there, and it is a thing, and it might actually be an organ. Like, so these beautiful metaphors that exist for a lot of what we're talking about, they are beautiful, poetic words, but I still feel like we've got a ways to go before someone can kind of look at that and find the job title version of that. Because like even today, you see someone who's got on LinkedIn or on their resume, I'm a connector, I'm a community weaver, I'm a this, I'm a that. And
what's
I love to see it, but I know ain't nobody out there who's actually looking at the resume is like, what the fuck is that? Right. So there's the connectors meta needs some more meta connecting to happen. And it's just how much of it's time and evolution, how much of it's continued exposure. And I think it goes both directions to recognize that there are people who already do this and have been doing this for as long as humans have existed. We've just, had a hard time seeing it with our eyes and not just feeling its effect secondarily. So being able to name it is hard for us still. But
there's I was just thinking this morning, there is a persistent ad on the Marketplace Morning Report for some company that there's something software, but they use 3 different metaphors during it. So we're like this, and this. I'm like, I still don't understand what you do. But then it was followed by somebody after who, let's just say, for the sake of, because it felt as concrete as that, it's like Workday. We're the ERP system of blah, or they wouldn't say ERP on the ad, but I've heard ads for Workday. I know what Workday is, and they say exactly what they do.
Yeah.
And I encountered in the past couple months this article on this, a way for consultants to kind of frame themselves, a waterfall of differentiation. And the first thing he's like, there's 3 parts. There's a 4th part if you have to say we're big, and that's important to you.
Yeah.
But the first thing is, what category do you fit in? And don't make up a category. Like, it has to fit into something they already have. It has to fit into a container they already got, so they can you get your sort of way in. And then you go to, okay, what do I do for you? And then why am I different from everybody else who's doing that for you?
Mm-hmm.
And what I've been trying to, and I'm still playing around with this is, well, what's that container? Like, for a while, I was playing around with using management consultant, but it might be too broad, whatever. So I'm using sort of an intermediary right now. It depends on, if I'm applying for a job or who I'm talking to. I think the general one is like strategic innovator and problem solver or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's me and Claude had a long conversation about this, but, coming up with 500 options or something.
Yeah.
But I do think, without some kind of name, we risk getting lost. But if we rush into the name too much, then it's going to turn into a whole, like, wait a minute, what? I don't even know what you're doing. So,
and I feel like that's kind of one of the most present things right now that remains sticky and unresolved for a lot of us in this world. So I don't know. That might be a good place to start to wrap. I don't know. How are you guys feeling?
I want to drop one more thing, which is kind of interesting here, and that's there's the naming part, because there's the power of naming there, and you look at Miranda Fricker and rally points, and by naming something, you can put an institution around it, and she uses sexual harassment as the example for that. Until they put it into the first legal document, there was no way to acknowledge it. There was no way to have any justice system built around it. There was no way to have preventative measures or reciprocity or recovery or anything along those lines. You had to have a name. And that was sort of my inspiration for when I went into Capital One, and I finally said, I'm going to call it transformation design. And everybody threw their arms up in the air and said, it's not transformation. I said, I don't care. Everyone in the Cynefin complexity community said, it's not really transformation. I said, we're not having the semantic discussion. I'm enabling something here. And what happened next was, after I did my first org-wide presentation on this is what transformation design was, which is basically, this is what complexity and service design equal together under the name of this, then I started getting people saying, I think I have a good use case, or I think I've got an opportunity where we need some transformation design to come in here. So I think there's planting that flag, but I also look at Skunkworks every once in a while. I don't know that people went into Skunkworks and said, we're going to do Skunkworks. They just kind of had this weird name for this weird team that built this reputation. And then when the reputation made it out the building, then everybody wanted their own Skunkworks. And so there's also the doing and influencing that sort of adopts its own assemblage. Is that the right way to use assemblage? It sort of imposes itself in interesting ways. It's the same way that our products take on verbs. We Photoshop things, we Google things. It encompasses more than just the small space that it was intended to occupy, and so it grows out of that. That's sort of I hope something comes out of that when we all are coming together in these communities and pooling resources, that our own Skunkworks will develop at some point, and then the Fast Company article pops up, and now everybody wants their own whatever it is we name it. And maybe not Fast Company, you know what I mean? There's a couple different ways to go about it. I have no idea which.
Well, I mean, A name can be a handle that gives somebody something to grab onto,
Okay.
without which it's a surface you can't get any purchase on. A name becomes a container, which makes it possible to transfer something from me to you. A name can start to become a territory. It gets defended. It boxes you in, right? Like, it goes through all the same evolution that anything else can and does. So, yeah. Just out of, respect to everybody, we,
Yeah.
we can see
We're in
how
time.
we feel. We can always come back and do this again, Stephen. But we didn't warn you, Stephen, and I didn't tell Kyle, but I was going to just ask, do you have any parting thoughts? I'm not going to ask the old question about what advice would you give to somebody. You could, do a question you think we should pose to a future guest. There are all these fun little tropes. I just want to kind of give you, like, anything you want to say. Last final words that we promise we won't add on to. So you get the final mic drop.
Lord, I mean, I think we've said enough in the last like 5 minutes. I have nothing more than thank you. So
Gracious, as always. Well, thank
Yeah,
you.
this has been
We
a blast.
appreciate this. This is super fun. We're going to keep doing it. We'll probably have you come back, I'm sure. But in
Yeah.
the meantime, thank you.
Yeah.
And
Thanks, Stephen.
that's it.